Okay. Good evening. No, not the ceremony. Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Nazir, Daf Gimel, and as well Daf Daled Amud Aleph. We'll be learning on Daled Amud Aleph until the last Mishnah on the page, which is about 10-12 lines from the bottom. Pretty straightforward Gemara, very explanatory of our starting Mishnah on Daf Beis, where we had a lot of different Lashonos that function as Kinuyim and or Yados, and here we're going to be speaking about a lot of the languages of the Yados. So let's jump right in. The Gemara at the 2 dots, 7 lines down on Gimel Amud Aleph reads as follows. We had said in our Mishnah that if a person says Hareini Kazeh, that they are considered to be a Nazir. So the Gemara says, Nihinami de tafus besaro, even had it been that he was holding on to his hair, okay, but the language of Hareini Kazeh, lo amar, he still didn't say anything. These 4 words are subject to some serious debate in the Meforshim as to what the right words are. There's actually a Tosfos on the bottom of the previous page. It's not located in the right spot that talks about it. You can see there are a couple of notes here on the side with the Hagos Habach and not the Hagos Habach. Who is it? I don't know, some other people. There's a lot of conversation here about the words. But the point is that the Gemara says, when I say Hareini Kazeh, seemingly it's less detailed than saying, hey, that I want to be like him. Because if you're touching your hair and you say Hareini Kazeh, but you still haven't really said anything. We don't know what the Kazeh is. Amar Shmuel, you're right. The case is Kigon Shahaya Nazir over Lefanav. We would need some Rishonim to explain the differences between the case of Ahei, when there's Nazir over Lefanav, and the case of Hareini Kazeh, where also we say that Nazir over Lefanav. What about the language of Hareini Misalsil? Mimai dehadein silsul sara. How do we know that the language of silsul is talking about hair? Says the Gemara, because the maidservant who was working in Rebbe's house, she said to a particular man, how long are you going to play with your hair for? She was a very strong personality, as we've seen throughout Shas a number of times. She was not messing around. She saw some guy playing with his hair and she called him out on it, like, stop twiddling your hair. Just stop playing with the payas. Says the Gemara, Ema, perhaps we can say that the word misalsa. What? Yeah, we saw that somewhere. I don't think it was this case, but yeah. Well, there we go. I hear the Bar-Ilan CD spinning, For those of you who know the frames of reference. What was the Gemara? Oh. Unbelievable.
If the Hamza to the Rabbi, her Karen wasn't released for 3 years or something,
You guys reminisce. I don't remember any of this. It's fine. So says the Gemara. I don't know. I knew that she existed. Says the Gemara, Ema Torah. Perhaps the word misalsel is actually not referring to hair, but is referring to Torah. Dichsiv salsaleha usiromemeka. That salsaleha, when you run your hands through it, meaning when you learn a lot of Torah, when you turn the pages usiromemeka, then you'll become elevated. So says the Gemara, how do we know that in fact over here the word misalsel is referring to a Nazir? Amar Shmuel, hacha namit shetafus besaro. Here he's saying Hareini misalsel, and he's holding his hair. So now we know the misalsel is connected to the hair, and therefore he's a Nazir. What about the language of Hareini mechalkel? We say mechalkel every day, multiple times a day, mechalkel chaim b'chesed. So our standing assumption with modern Hebrew, with any Hebrew really, would be that mechalkel is to feed somebody. So the Gemara says, mimai dehaden kilkul sa'arahu. How do we know that if a person were to say Hareini mechalkel, that he's a Nazir, how do we know that it's talking about hair? Says the Gemara, kiditznan, like we learned in a Mishnah. Sid, which is a material, a lime, some type of paste. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the amount that you'd carry in order to be chayiv on Shabbos is kedei lasud kilkul, in order to place lime on the kilkul. What's a kilkul? Says the Gemara, Amar Rav says it's bas tzida. It's the side hair, it's the temple. So what the women would do to make sure that their hair was matted down and not sticking out is they would put some type, our today's language of hair paste or hair gel, they put some down and push the hair back so that it wouldn't stick out. For Harai, they didn't shave their heads, just saying. So they would then paste the hair back on their temples. What? True story. True story. So here the Gemara says that's how we know that Mechalkel is referring to the word of Kilkul, which is Kilkul, as the Rav said, is Bastida. So that's how we know that that's the case. Ema says the Gemara, why do we have to say that that's the case? You're right that there's one way in order to explain the word Kilkul that it means hair, but really Ema Mizone, Mezon Aniye. Maybe we're talking about feeding poor people. The brothers came down, they had no food. They needed rations, so they went down to Yosef, Litzbor Bar. So the Gemara says that here we have the language of Mechalkel, which is feeding. So the Gemara says you're 100% correct. Amar Shmuel, halfway down Gimel Amud Aleph, Hochanami shetafus pesaro. Here as well, we're talking about a case where a person says, Hareini Mechalkel, he's touching his hair, and that is considered sufficient to be in the camp of making a Nazir. We also saw in our Mishnah, Harei alai l'shaleach pera. Nazir. If a person says, I'm going to be Meshaleach Pera, we know that Pera is a reference to hair, but what does the word L'Shaleach mean? Mimai dehadein shiluach ribuyahu. How do we know that if a person says L'Shaleach Pera, it means to grow your hair? Maybe it means something else. So the Gemara says, we know that the word in this case of shiluach actually does mean growth. Referencing derech mashal, a woman's hair. This is from Shir Hashirim. And there the Gemara says, Shalachayach Pardes Yimonim, we're talking about a woman's beauty, and obviously the longer the hair, the more beautiful it is. This was big shaila in the poskim. When I was living in Eretz Yisrael, I remember my wife took a class with Rebbetzin Tehila Abramov, and they were learning how to be Kala teachers. So the way that they were learning how to be Kala teachers is all of the women in the room had headphones on, and she'd speak into a microphone. They're all sitting in the same room, but she didn't want to talk out loud. She didn't want people outside the door to hear it. So she didn't want to a bellowing voice. So she was just talking very quietly. So my wife said she came home that night. She's like, I think we have to burn all of our sheitel. I'm like, what are you talking about? She said that, Rabbi Yasha was of the opinion that a sheitel that goes down to your shoulders, pasnish, that's not so firm. So we were in the YU Gross Kola that went over to David Miller, the Rosh Kola, and he's like, yeah, in their neighborhood, it's Mama Shasar. That's a minhag of Hossein B'Yadin. In their makom minhag, that's right. You cannot have a long sheitel. So all their sheitels are short with a little thing on the top. That's minhag makom. If you want to live there, you're right. You should change your sheitels. But here, when everybody's wearing sheitels, they have to be tzanua. But it's not a halachic issue. It's a minhag makom question. Anyways, we know that the longer hair is what it's talking about here. That's how we know that that shiluach in this phraseology of l'shaleach pera counts. Says the Gemara, I can give you another mari makom where shiluach is used as a removal word, not as an additive word. How so? Ema midi de avure. I could show you that it's actually removing. The water is being sent from the heavens. When you take water out of the heavens, aren't you removing them from the heavens? So when you're removing water from the heavens, al pnei chutzos, onto the ground, then you're removing. So says the Gemara, okay, here's answer number one to this question. Tana pera yalif. We have the word pera in two places. Ksivhacha kadosh yagadol pera. By Nazir, we have this language of pera. Uksivhasam gabe kohen hedyot upera lo yishalechu. By Kohanim, they can't have their hair very long. So therefore, we see that the word pera over here is referring to hair lo yishalechu, should not become long. Therefore, we see the word shiluach by itself is to lengthen hair. That's how we see that the language in our Mishnah of Harei alai l'shalech pera is referring to a Nazir, and Harei is a Nazir. The Mishnah paskins this person would be a Nazir. There's another possibility about the word shiluach or l'shaleach. V'baisema, 10 lines, 8 lines, 9 lines from the bottom of the page on Gimel Amud Aleph, says the Gemara as follows. Even the pasuk where we said that the water is being removed from the heavens, it really is adding. It's not referring to being removed from the sky. It's adding to the chutzos. We said that it's going to fall out pnei chutzos. Says the Gemara in Matagim Rabbi Yosef to Kadmashkin le'maya lepira, when the water falls onto the fruits virave, and they're going to grow. So we see that the word shiluach can even be understood in the pasuk that way without the negative understanding. And therefore, no matter how you learn, we assume that if a person says Harei alai l'shalech pera, that they are absolutely a Nazir. And then in our Mishnah, in the beginning of the Masechta, we saw this phraseology, Harei alai tziporin, Rabbi Meir Omer Nazir, that if a person says, these birds are hereby upon me, then they are considered a Nazir. That's Shitas Rabbi Meir. The Mishnah also quoted a dissenting opinion of the Chachamim, that this phrase is not enough to make a person into a Nazir. Let's just start out this little section with one word of introduction, and that is that a tzipor, a bird, is not a typical korban of a Nazir. It's only the korban of a Nazir if he becomes tamei meis in the midst of his Nazirus. Otherwise, what he would typically bring is a chatas, asham, and an ola, and he's done. But here, only if there's tumas, there become the need to bring birds. So that's the context here. He brings 3 korbanos. Chatas, ola, shlamim. You're right. Thank you. So that's what the Gemara says, and we have to figure out both the Shita of Rav Meir and the Shita of the Chachamim. My time of the Rav Meir, why does Rav Meir say that if a person says the phrase of Harei Alai Tziporin that they become a Nazir? Because I'm a Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish explains that Rav Meir was of the opinion that Tziporin Smuchen L'Seir Kibel Alav. He held that if you say the word Tziporin and there's a pasuk which speaks about Seir next to it, which is in fact the case, as we will see in a moment, Kibel Alav, then the korban is nitfas. Then the not the korban, but the Nazir is nitfas. T'chsiv. What does the pasuk say? This is a pasuk in Sefer Daniel, and it reads Ad di sare kinishrin riva v'tifroi kitziporin. We see in one pasuk the word sare, which is referring to hair, and we see kitziporin. So really, according to Rav Meir, the tziporin of our Mishnah, which makes you into a Nazir, when a person says, when they say Harei Alai Tziporin, it's not because of the birds that he became Tameh and he had to bring birds. It's because the pasuk in Daniel speaks about birds and hair. And once you say birds, it triggers the word hair, and therefore you become a Nazir, which is odd because all you said was bird, and halachically you became a Nazir because of hair. So he is Dorish Smuchen, is probably one of the way we probably like to say it. And Rav Meir Savar matvis inish b'midi d'samichle. That when a person says Harei Alai Tziporin, he of course Pashat knows Tanakh, like we all do, especially Daniel. And when you say Tziporin, you know that in that pasuk there's another word that talks about hair, and therefore you know that when you say if A equals B and B equals C, then A equals C, then you're just going to become a Nazir by talking about birds, even though the bird has nothing to do with the korban to be brought when the Nazir becomes Tameh Meis. This has nothing to do with that. It's just word association game. However, in sharp contrast, on the top of Gimel Amud Beis, the Chachamim don't agree. We don't look at the word Tziporin in one pasuk, and a few words later it says Sare. We don't make those. It's not A equals B and B equals C and A. It's not like that at all. That's why they hold the Chachamim say that this is not Nazirus. That's the approach of Reish Lakish. That the machlokas is whether or not we're Dorish Smuchen within a pasuk. Rav Meir says yes. The Chachamim say no. However, on the second line of this Amud, Gimel Amud Beis, Rabbi Yochanan argues and says, Omar, Tekule Alma lo matvis. No, even Rav Meir doesn't agree to that. Ella, what is the machlokas Beishama? What is the machlokas Rav Meir and the Chachamim? Elohainu taima de Rav Meir. The reason why Rav Meir says that you become a Nazir is because the Chayshin and Shema Tzipore Nazir Tameh Kibel Alav. Maybe the Kabbalah that he said was that he's going to be bringing birds in the event that I become a Nazir and I become Tameh, and therefore I'll be obligated in birds. It's a chashash. So says the Gemara, Michti, hold on one second. Chayshinun Kamar? We're saying he's a Nazir based on a chashash. Dilma, perhaps he didn't mean that at all. Dilma Tzipore Nadava Kibel Alav. Maybe he only wanted to bring Tzipore Nadava, having nothing to do with a Nazir. Says the Gemara, that can't be. It can't be that we're talking about Tziporin that are a Nadava. Why not? Im Kain, if it were to have been the case that he was talking about Tziporin Nadava, he would have said a different language of Harei Alai Ken. I would bring this nest. That was the more common language. But to say the convoluted language, or what the Gemara is considering to be the convoluted language of Harei Alai Tziporin, that's not the right word. It's like when you socially use the wrong word, even though it means a similar thing, you're off. Something's wrong with you. The reason you're speaking off is because you mean something else. Had it been Nadava, we would have used the language of Ken, not the words of Tzipor. So therefore, the Gemara says it's impossible to say that it's talking about anything else, and it has to be talking about Nazir. Simkin Harei Alai Kan Mibayle would have been the right language. Says the Gemara, but Dilma, perhaps he's not saying that I want to be a Nazir like him, this guy who's bringing korbanos, but perhaps Harei Alai Tzipor Mitzora. Maybe he's not talking about anything other than birds of the Mitzora. Who says Meicha Tesi that he's talking about Nazirus at all? Kamar. So says the Gemara, like we've seen many times, the case that we must be dealing with is Kigon Shahaya Nazir over Lafana. So let's review. What is the case that we're talking about? A person says Harei Alai Tziporin. When does he say it? In front of a Nazir. And because he said it in front of a Nazir, so therefore that is going to be considered Nazirus. Vidilma perhaps.
Even though you said the birds that they would bring is only if it becomes a Nazir, only if it becomes Tamil. We still associate it to Stam Nazirus.
Well, yeah, we assume that, yeah, that's what we're saying, is that, well, really the language of Rav Yochanan within Rav Meir is Chayshinan, which, I mean, it's hard to say this, but I think it's correct that it's only Nazirus Midrabanan. It's only Nazirus Bechashash, maybe call it a Safek Doraisa. But we don't know, because if in fact this Nazir ends up becoming Tameh Meis, Okay, so it's a little. We would need some Rishonim to really get to the bottom of Rav Yochanan within Rav Meir. That's what it seems like. That's what it seems like in the Gemara. What?
Does he still have to bring the Korbanos as a Mashach?
No, but at the end of Nazirus, he would have to bring them. It's a suffix deraisa.
Not bird.
The birds are only brought if he becomes tamei mace during his Nazirus.
Right.
So that's what the Gemara says here. And the Gemara pushes one more time. The Dilma Nazir Tamei Lepochim in Korbanos Kamar. Maybe he's not saying I want to be a Nazir, and in the event that the chashash, everything, maybe it's not that. Maybe perhaps it's just to say that I feel bad for that guy. Instead of having 30 days of Nazirs, he became Tamei Mace on day 20. Now he has to go through a whole process and add another 30 days. I feel I'm going to pay for his korbanos. Maybe that's what he meant. I'm just saying I'm going to pay for the birds. I'm not saying I want to become a Nazir. The Gemara says, Kagon Shai Nazir Tahor over Lefanav. We're only talking about a case of a Nazir Tahor. Okay, so says the Gemara, My Beinahu. What is the difference between the approach of Reish Lakish and the approach of Rav Yochanan? Let's review. According to Reish Lakish, the machlokas between Rav Meir and the Chachamim was about whether or not we're Dorish Smuchin. And remember, we said the pasuk had the word Seyar and it had the word Sipor, and we're Dorish Smuchin. Masha'en Kain, according to Rav Yochanan, the machlokas is about whether or not we're Choshesh, that Sipor and Nazir Tamei Kibalala. So let's see what the difference is. Ika Beinaihu, here's the case that's very different. Could go into Amar Sipor and Smuchin, the Seyar Alai. He says, you know the word Siporin, the one that's close to the word Seir in the pasuk in Daniel, Alai. That's what I'm accepting upon myself. So says the Gemara, Le Rav Yochanan, I don't care if you said that because I'm not Dorish Smuchin. Then Afal Gavda Amar Hachi, even though I specifically said A and B, I said the two things that are in the same pasuk, it doesn't matter. We're not Dorish Smuchin. So therefore, Nazir over Lefanav in Ilolo. It's only dependent on one variable, and that is whether or not there's a person who's there. However, the Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Afagav De'ein Nazir over Lefanav, because according to Rav Shimon ben Lakish, Rav Meir's whole shita was based on Smuchin, and therefore that would be the nafkamina that even if there's no Nazir, according to Rav Shimon ben Lakish's approach within Rav Meir, he would still be a Nazir, even if there was no Nazir over there, and he just said Sipor and Smuchin l'seir alai. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. How can the Chachamim be of the opinion that there is no tfisa of two words in the same pasuk? After all, v'hatanya haomer yamin hareza shvua. If a person uses the word of yamin, the right, and they are using it, the right hand, right? They're saying the right hand, and they are saying it in the frame of a neder. So the Gemara says that's a shvua. And here's the Gemara's analysis of the Brisa. My taima. Why is it that we would have assumed that the word yamin is a neder language? La'ab mishum dechsib, because the pasuk says vayarim yamina usmolo hashemayim vayishava b'cheolam. Look what's in the pasuk, yamino and vayishba. Oh, so if we know that yamino is taka neder, and it is, if we know that yamino is a neder, and we have a pasuk that shows that there's smicha, so the chachamim have to be wrong. The pasuk includes the word yamino and vayishava. So here we see that there is smuchin. So how would the chachamim get out of that?
How do you deal with small?
We'll talk about that in the Gemara. The Gemara says, Amrei lo, that's not why yamin is a neder. Mishum the yamin gufe ikre shvua. The word yamin by itself, not because of smuchin, not because the pasuk says yamino and vayishava. On its own, the word yamin is always going to be for a neder. How do we know this? Titania, because we have a brisa a little bit more than halfway down. Minayin lo omer yamin shehu shvua. From where do we know that the word yamin is a shvua? Shneimar nishba Hashem biyamino. That a Kadosh Baruch Hu made a shvua with his yamin. Let's be clear here. This isn't smichus. It's not because both words are there. It's telling us what a Kadosh Baruch Hu did. He made a neder biyamino. So therefore, we see that that's the case. Texas question, 2/3 of the way down. How do we know that if a person says they make a neder with their left hand, that's considered to be a shvua? Shneimar uvizroa uzo. Same pasuk. So therefore, we see that yamin and small. We tried to ask a kasha on the chachamim that maybe everybody holds smuchin kamash malana. That's not true. It's still a machlokas according to Reish Lakish's understanding of Reb Meir and the chachamim. And the chachamim got out of it no problem. Yamin is not going to be a shvua because of the fact that it's smuchin. Yamin has its own reasons for being considered a neder. And that brings us to a new mishnah, a mishnah that has a very, very important machlokas in the Tanoim. Our mishnah doesn't quote the machlokas. The Gemara will. The Mishnah says, Hareini Nazir, a person says, I am hereby a Nazir min achartzanim, from this part of the grapes, min azagin, min atziglachas, from getting a haircut, min atuma, and you speak about it piecemeal. Says the Gemara, Reza Nazir, b'chol dikdukin is zero salah. If you only speak about some parts of these things, the halacha is if you only say one of them, you're done. Mina zagim from the mina chartanim from the leftover what's it called, the grapes, huh? Yeah. Yeah, grape skins. There's a sediment that sounds more right. Yeah. So if you only say one of them, you're done, which is interesting because you're talking about Nazirus. Maybe I just want to take a neder only on that.
Or Nazir meat. He says the word Nazir.
Yes, but it's only mina chartanim.
Limits it.
Yeah, but I want to be a partial Nazir. Okay, so this says the Gemara, says the Mishnah, B'chol dikduke Nazir salav. Even if you pick up just on one of the features of being a Nazir, all of them apply. It says the Gemara, Masnisin deloki Reb Shimon. Our Mishnah cannot be like the opinion of Reb Shimon. Why not? The Tanya, Reb Shimon Omer Eino chayav ad sheyidor mikulam. You can't say Hareini Nazir min achartzanim and stop. You got to include everything. You could say Hareini Nazir. You can say Hareini Nazir mean X, Y, A, B, and C and say the whole list. That's also fine. But if you only say Hareini Nazir mean X, Reb Shimon says you're nothing. And the Rabbanan argue, Rabbanan Amre, afilu lo Nazir ala bechad min hon. Even if you only accept one piece of Nazirus, you say Hareini Nazir min achartzanim, and then you stop talking. The Rabbanan are of the opinion that lo Nazir ala bechad min hon have Nazir. Now let's get into the kishkas as to why each of these Tanaim hold what they do. My time with the Reb Shimon. Why does Reb Shimon say that your Nazirus is not chal unless you accept upon yourself all of the aspects of Nazirus? Says the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom, because Amar Kra. First, the pasuk speaks generally, Mikol Asher Ye'aseh Migefen Hayayin, and then it distinguishes Michartzanim Ve'ad Zog. It has to be talking about the entire thing. And because the pasuk went out of its way to say Michartzanim Ve'ad Zog, he was of the opinion that you have to include everything, and that's why he says that if you only say one thing, it doesn't count. Your Nazirus is not chal. V'Rabbanan my taima. Why is it that the rabbis are of the opinion that even if you only speak about one piece of Nazirus, that you're still a Nazir in all cases? V'chol dikduke Nazirus alav. The Gemara says, Amar Kra miyayin v'sheichar yazir. Because the pasuk says that from wine and from beer, yazir. So what does the pasuk say? It's only talking about one thing. It's only talking about alcohol or grape alcohol. So there the Gemara says that's sufficient. That's why the Chachamim are of the opinion that you are going to be a Nazir even for only one piece. The Reb Shimon Nami, Reb Shimon, you who say that you have to say all pieces of Nazirus in order to be a Nazir, but Haksiv miyayin v'sheichar yazir. What do you do with that pasuk? Oh, so says the Gemara, brilliant point. Hahumi boile. Reb Shimon needs that pasuk to teach us less or yayin mitzvah ki yayin reshus. I might have had a havamina, says the Gemara, that when I say that I'm not allowed to drink wine as a Nazir, that's only yayin shel reshus. But yayin shel mitzvah, maybe havamina, says the Gemara, maybe I would have thought that yayin shel mitzvah is different. Kamash Malan says, Reb Shimon, that's what we use the pasuk of the pasuk of miyayin v'sheichar yazir to teach us le'asor yayin mitzvah ki yayin reshus. It's crazy havamina, by the way. It's really not a havamina. Really, what he's saying is it's a drasha. The drasha is that you might have thought, I guess it is a havamina, you might have thought X. You're wrong. You're wrong. The pasuk says it's not acceptable. So now the Gemara is bothered. Maihi. We'll get to them. Maihi, bottom line of Gimel Amud Beis. What is this magical wine, which is Yain Shel Mitzvah? After all, says the Gemara, you want to say it's Kiddushta v'Havdalta? You want to say it's Kiddush on Friday night? You want to say it's Havdalah? That is absolutely not the case. Take a look at the Mefarish at the very bottom of the page. Let's see what he says. Michael alei Isser Nazirus. You want to say that that's what it's talking about? The Gemara continues. Hare Mushba ve'Omer alav mehar Sinai. Are these dinim in the Torah? We know that when we make Kiddush on Friday night, Kiddush is Deoraisa. But the wine in the Kiddush, Zochreyu al Hayayin, is all Derabanan. We paskin, even though there's a machlokas about this, we paskin that Havdalah is a din Derabanan klal uchlam. So for sure, there's no psukim in Chumash to say that we should ever have a mitzvah Deoraisa to drink wine. So therefore, says the Gemara, what are you talking about? What wine are you talking about that has a status of wine Deoraisa that we would even need a pasuk to exclude it? Derabanan.
Not in seaport if you want to derive it, right?
There's more than that, but the kostos are. There's other things also. The Sipor Yitzias Mitzrayim is itself a din d'oraisa. So there are other things, but for sure the kostos are a din d'Rabbanan. Purim Pashat is d'Rabbanan. The whole holiday is d'Rabbanan. Rosh Hashanah, all the yantifs, all d'Rabbanan. Zochreyu ala yayin. So the Gemara is very bothered. Do we ever have a time midoraisa that we have to drink wine? And if that's the case, that we don't have one, then what in the world is Reb Shimon talking about? Why do we need a drasha to exclude something that doesn't exist in halacha?
In verse 2.
For sure, d'Rabbanan. For sure. There's only one thing that's d'oraisa to bris. That's it. Everything else is trimmings. Because you have a pasuk in Chumash. The pasuk in Chumash is coming to preclude something. Can't come to preclude it din d'Rabbanan. It's got to come to preclude it din d'oraisa. It's pasuk in Chumash. Asmachtas. Asmachtas. Yeah. So the Gemara says, Ella, you're right. There is no case that's d'oraisa where we drink wine. Ella ki hada amar Rava. Here is a scenario where we create wine being a din d'oraisa. Shvua she'eshte. I hereby make a shvua, and it's halachically binding that I'm going to drink wine. V'chazar ve'amar hareini Nazir.
Yeah.
And then he says, just joking, I'm a Nazir. It's not really just joking. It's more like he said both of them and both were binding. Well, now we have opposing realities. On the one hand, his shvua requires him to drink a cup of wine. And at the same time, his nazirus forbids him to drinking a cup of wine. And both of those are a din d'oraisa. This is why Reb Shimon needs the pasuk of miyayin v'sheichar yazir, that the nazirus, says the Gemara, asya nazirus chayla al hashvua. And the nazirus trumps the shvua. It's fascinating. What? Crazy who can. Yeah. But it's the only, once the question was articulated and we talked it through, that there really is no precedent of drinking wine midoraisa.
This is why the pasuk brought.
Yeah. By the way, it is a somewhat out of the box ukimta, but it also deals with another issue of what happens when you have a competing shavua and two competing halachic shuas, a shvua and a neder, a shvua and a zirus. Those are things that we need answers to, because we're not very detailed in our words, but for a person who knew they took a shvua and then they have another neder, how do you weigh them? Which one wins? We're not using the principles of aseh dochelos aseh. We're not looking at this as pure two isurim. If you don't drink the wine, it's an isser of the shvua. And if you drink the wine, it's an isser of the zirus. So that's what the Gemara says. That's what the pasuk is for. The pasuk is coming to tell us through Rava's lens that what we're talking about is a case where the shvua was she'eshte and the nazirus was an immediate chaser, and the result is asya nazirus chayla al shvua. Asks the Gemara, stands question, Rabbanan nami hami boy le'leser yein mitzvah ki yein reshus. So where do they learn it from? So it says the Gemara, don't worry. The pasuk of miyayin v'sheichar, the miyayin v'sheichar yazir imkein le'makra should have just said miyayin. Why an extra word? Shamas minotarte. We here can learn two things. We could learn, what was the first thing we learned? That the status of nazirus is even piecemeal, and also we can learn the second din is that even yayin shel mitzvah is going to be awesome. Reb Shimon, the Gemara says, Hainu Taima, what do you do with the word sheichar? If in fact the word sheichar was extraneous as the way the Rabbanan understand it, what do you do with the word sheichar? He says, don't worry, I got it. 6 lines down. Dalet Amud Aleph. Reb Shimon, Hainu Taima de Kosav sheichar, la alufe sheichar the mikdash, to teach us a very important side din for the Kohanim in the room when they go into the base of mikdash. Tichsiv over there, yain v'sheichar al teisht atov anecha yitach. You cannot go into the base of mikdash when you drink. Listen to this, because I never would have thought it. Ma gabe Nazir yain hu delitzar aval shar mashkin lo. Just like by a Nazir, the isser is only on a grape product, but you can have tequila. You can have something that isn't based on a grape, but does have alcohol. Af gabe mikdash nami yain hu delitzar aval shar mashkin amishtakrin lo. Unbelievable kal v'chomer that the prohibition of a kohen in the Beis HaMikdash isn't about das. It's about getting drunk from wine only. Correct. A grape product. Who knew?
Here.
Shows up after Kiddush Club to go do his avoda. Very good. Very good. Oh, wow. Do you think they, okay, they for sure didn't have that. But this is only one shita. This is the shita of Reb Shimon. Masha'en came, the Gemara says, Ula'afu came with Reb Yehuda. Reb Yehuda took a little bit more of an alcoholic anonymous approach and said anything that's intoxicating. The Tanya, Reb Yehuda Omer, You ate these foods and they have fermented and they have alcohol in them and you got trashed and you walk into the Beis HaMikdash, you're chayav. Afal pi, there's no great product. But Reb Shimon uses the word sheichar to teach us that only great products, just like by Nazirus, are the things that will cause a problem for Kohanim. That's la alufe sheichar. That was the Gzeira Shava that he learned.
What is sheichar?
It's date beer. It's date beer.
It's not a wine product.
No.
But they're dying the sheichar. It's excluding wine. What's the limit exactly?
But our scroll calls it aged wine.
Oh, really?
Oh, that's why I'm asking.
Yeah, that's correct.
In
I
our
didn't see that.
vernacular, sheichar is beer, but maybe not. That's why, because it's only.
Yeah, it has to be,
mentions
right.
Specific wine products and it mentions.
So it's
That
mentioning,
may be the limit.
so therefore that's the limit, is mentioning two different wines. Right,
So that's why it's only.
right. So then it's not date beer. But the example that was given here about what he did drink in under Rabbi Yehuda, it doesn't say sheichar either. There he was eating devela ki'ilis v'shasa dvash. He was eating things. Dvash is not, we know throughout the Torah, dvash is not bee honey, but it's date honey. And that's probably where he got drunk. And that's going to be considered a chiv. So that's a machlokes tanoim. If a kohen goes into the Beis HaMikdash inebriated by a non-grape alcoholic beverage, if he's going to be chayav or not. Be careful, Ab. Careful. Iba Yisema. What? Yeah, you gotta first of all get the Beis HaMikdash built, and then when you're doing your avoda, go before Kiddush Club. Don't go, So the Gemara says, Iba Yisema, we have a whole nother approach to Reb Shimon. At the beginning of our Gemara, at the bottom of Gimel Amud Beis, we had said that the sheet of Reb Shimon was based on the pasuk of Mikol Asher Yasemi Gefen Hayayin Michartzanim Va'adzog. And here, a third of the way down on Dalad Medalef, the Gemara gives a second approach. Iba Yisema, Reb Shimon, les le iser chalal iser. Wow. He says it doesn't work because it's iser chalal iser. So if you take upon yourself to not drink wine, so then you can't add another iser of Nazirus. So you're not a full Nazir, and in fact you're a zero because ein iser is chalal iser. Titania, where do we see that Reb Shimon holds of ein iser chalal iser? But
Is it also passing Isser Musif?
I don't know. Those are competing sugyas. I don't know how they interplay. In Isser Chalal Isser and Isser Mosif, I don't know.
Saying, let's say the case of the Nazir, because besides for that, there's other things which.
He's not a Nazir. It's Ein Isser Chalal Isser. It's nothing.
Okay,
So then the Gemara says, what's the Raya Brura that Reb Shimon is of the opinion of Ein Isser Chalal Isser? To Tanya, Reb Shimon Omer ha'ochal nevela b'yom ha'kippurim pater. If a person eats nevela and they eat it on Yom Kippur, so first of all, they need some serious, they need help. That's not normal. You should not be eating nevela on Yom Kippur. But if you do, your only isser is for nevela, but you're pater on the achila of Yom Kippur. Haraya ain isser chalal isser. What?
The kares anyway, right?
Nope, no kares. Kares is only by achila on Yom Kippur. That's what you're pater from. You get a regular isser doraisa, regular as it were, of eating nevela. But you're pater from kares because ein isser chalal isser, you can't stack isurim.
What about Kimla?
That's true, and you have two isurim, but this is not two isurim. It's ein isser chalal isser.
Why isn't it so sorry?
Ein isser chalal isser and mitzias. You can't stack according to him. You can't. It's not functional. The mechanics don't work. The two isurim, you can't do one mice and have two and violate two isurim. It's not possible.
Second medium-sized wine for Rashi. He brings similarly. Reb Shimon Latami Darman Sefta says, "Dafilu iser chomer lo asim kayla iser kal." Even when you have something that's more chomer, which you would think would take precedence, it's not.
Let's say Yom
Iser
Kippur in
kal
this case.
isn't
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Right, no.
Get right, the kares would certainly be more chomer. Reb Shimon holds that it still doesn't.
So that's saying that the only kares on Yom Kippur is if you ate kosher food.
Oh yeah.
Kind of a strange concept.
But you are under the assumption that it's called achila. We have this also by basar b'chalav, that if the meat is not kosher meat or the milk is not kosher milk, that's not basar b'chalav. You only violate the isser of non-kosher for the meat. Cheese is hard to make treif. I mean, it's not kosher. Most cheeses are not kosher. And the airlines, some of the boxes, the United Tapas box, it has a little thing of cheese in it. So it's not hechsher. Is it treif? I don't know what animal parts do they put in. Is it batal b'shishim? I have no idea. I'm sure it's very, very complicated. But okay, that's what the Gemara says. That's how we know Reb Shimon is of the opinion of ein isser chalal isser. So his whole mechanics in our mission of harini nazir mina achartzanim doesn't work. Well, the Rabbana Nami, what do they say? Mikol asher yasemi gefen hayayin. because that was the pasuk that Reb Shimon in answer number 1 said was his reason as to why the person is not a Nazir in our Mishnah. So it says the Gemara, what do they do with that pasuk? They say that the Isser of Nazirus is mitzaref one to the next. So what this means is that if you eat one part of a shiur from a red grape and another part of a shiur from a green grape, and then you drink a little bit of wine, okay, I don't know how all the mixtures work, because some are solids, some are liquids, but Lamaisa, the halacha is that they're mitzaref zayin zeh. And says the Gemara, Reb Shimon was of the opinion of less late tziruf. Reb Shimon would say that they do not stack. You're not able to add together partial achilas. To Tanya Reb Shimon Omer kol shehu lemakos. Everyone agrees that if you eat a very small amount of grapes, you deserve makos. Lo amru kazai in korban. That's it. That even if you eat a little bit. So that's not mitzaref. You're going to get your punishment right away. And if you continue eating, you'll get different punishments and more punishments. But he would be of the opinion of less late tzeruf, and that's a machlokas between them. The next Mishnah, we know already that there's this principle of Nazir Shimshon. Nazir Shimshon is a lifelong commitment, from birth. Don't cut the hair. His hair must have been very, very long. And we know the well-known story of when they cut his hair and he asked the Kodesh Baruch Hu for a little more strength and he knocked down the whole building. There's a lot of shilas there about killing yourself for the sake of saving other people. These are good shilas in the Rishonim to discuss, not for now. But what if a person says, Hareini kishimshon, kiven manoach, kibal delila, kimisha akar delasos aza, kimisha nikru plishtim es enav, hareza nazir shimshon. If you say all of these things, not one of these things like our previous Mishnah, if you say all of these things, you're a Nazir. So says the Gemara, Lama li lemisna kol halein. Why do we need all of this information? Why can't I just say I want to be Nazir Shimshon like Shimshon? Says the Gemara, Di Yomar Hareini Kishimshon, Habamina Shimshon Achrina. Kamashmalan. Therefore, we can't only say Shimshon, we have to add in Kiven Manoach. So now the person says Hareini Kishimshon Kiben Manoach. Vitana Kiben Manoach. And if you only taught that, Habamina Ika de Miskari Hachi. Somebody else in the world is called Manoach, and he probably has a son. So it says the Gemara, Kamashmalan Kibal Delila. Just like the husband of Delila, that he had married Delila, of just being very thorough to make sure that we know that you're really in the camp of Shimshon. So basically, if there's any element of doubt in regards to a Nazir Shimshon, you are not a Nazir. We need all of the features. It's es bini, it's asher ahavta, it's yichidcha. It's like the psukim over there in Chumash and Breishis. So here too, we have to make sure that we're 100% sure that it's actually Nazir Shimshon, because that's a different Nazirus than regular Nazirus. We'll stop right here on Shabbos. We'll pick up 45 minutes before Mincha. I believe that's at 3:45, and we'll pick up at this new Mishnah. Wishing you all a beautiful night.
All right, so Nazir Shimshon.